Hello, and welcome to Love Where You Live, the Art of Being Neighborly. I'm your host, Ronald Uveda, and we're laying the foundation for how to be a good neighbor. Think about your home. It's built on a foundation. And the stronger the foundation, the stronger and more stable your home. Being neighborly is the same way. It starts with a strong foundation, to be present and to practice compassion. When you're present, you notice your neighbors. You really see them, and you're able to both know them and be known. And then you can practice compassion or show concern for them. Being present and practicing compassion will naturally call for some tolerance and grace. So joining us today to talk about how to do this is John Burke, an Austinite and a best-selling author.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you today about how we can become better neighbors so that ultimately we really do love where we live. You know, it's easy to love Austin. I've lived in Austin the last 20 out of 30 years of my life. When I graduated UT, everybody wanted to live in Austin, but there weren't jobs, and so I had to move away. But we moved back as fast as we could. And what's not to love about this creative, artsy, high-tech city? You know, whether it's downtown or a beautiful sunset out at Lake Travis, it's just an easy place to love. But you know, sometimes we can love our city even more than we love the people right around us in our city. And that's why we're talking about how we can better love our neighbors, because ultimately that leads to loving where we live. Well, you know, what is it that keeps us from being better neighbors? Sometimes it's just time, like we talked about last week, but sometimes it's differences. You know, we're a very diverse city, and we have differences, different races, different ethnicities, different cultural backgrounds, different belief systems, different political ideas, different habits and lifestyles. And so what do you do with that? You know, if we're gonna be people who better love one another, it starts by figuring out what we do with our differences. You know, the most natural thing for all of us is to judge each other's differences and push each other away. Because after all, it's not what we value or like. And that's pretty typical of all of us. But if we're gonna love, we can take a step toward tolerance. You know, tolerance is just a willingness to respect that other person, even though we might not like or appreciate what they do or the differences that they have with us. Tolerance is a step toward loving the people around us, but we can go even a step further, and that's grace. Grace offers kindness and compassion. It's an expression of love and valuing that person despite our differences. So tolerance may put up with behavior or differences that we don't necessarily like or agree with, but grace goes a step further to seeing the value of a person despite those differences or behaviors we don't like. Why should we even bother to move from judging to tolerance to grace? Well, there are benefits for all of us. You know, a person will feel loved if they feel valued, right? If they feel accepted and valued by you, they will feel loved. And that makes you a more loving, joyful person. And when you offer that, you'll find it being reciprocated as well. And when we do that with our neighbors, over time we find that we have a lot of commonalities as well. And you develop friendships that maybe you didn't even know could even be there. And then we create a community that is healthy and vibrant, and that's really the goal of this. You know, when we first moved back to Austin, we tried to live this out by getting to know our neighbors. And we did get to know about 5 of our neighbors. And there were differences, like Richard and Sarah. They came from London and New Zealand. They had different cultures, different accents, different ways of going about things, like different sports. And at first, we both noticed the differences in each other. But in time, we started to ask questions and get to know their story, and they got to know our story and found out we had some commonalities, like they wanted their son to play soccer, and I was coaching my son in soccer, so they joined our soccer team. And the more we got to know each other, the more we found in common, And as a neighborhood, we all got to be friends. We babysat each other's kids, and we had barbecues together and did Halloween together. And when troubles would come up, we would support each other. And several years down the road, Richard and Sarah had marriage problems, and they actually came to us because they knew we valued them. And we knew they valued us. And they were able to be honest and open about it. And years later, they told us that our support really helped them keep their marriage together. Well, it was reciprocal because over time, my wife had suffered with 20 years of horrible migraine headaches. And she had had a similar issue and had found something that helped her that she told my wife about, and my wife overcame 20 years of headaches. Well, how do we grow in grace? Well, I think first, when we see differences, we have to decide that we're going to suspend judgment, that we're going to instead ask questions, be curious, get to know the person's story. When you get to know a person's story, you understand a lot more about them, and share your story so that you become a real person to them. Bono of U2 has a song called Grace, and in it says, "Grace makes beauty out of ugly things. Grace makes beauty out of everything." And that's difficult, right? Like, what happens when there are things that you really just don't like? They're just kind of ugly. I mean, I've had neighbors who they had wild parties, and I knew there were drugs and stuff going on, and I'm trying to go to sleep. It's 2 in the morning. I have work in the morning, and there are brawls out in the front yard and broken beer bottles in my front yard. What do you do then? And next week we're going to talk about conflict resolution. And one thing we did have to do is go and have a nice conversation about, limiting their behavior somewhat. But the other thing is we also try to extend grace by giving them a ride to work, by asking questions and getting to know more of who they were and their story. And this is what has always helped me. When I lived overseas, my favorite museum had this famous painting by Rembrandt called The Return of the Prodigal Son. And it's a painting worth millions of dollars. Now imagine if you were walking outside that museum one day, and there in the dumpster, you found Rembrandt's masterpiece, The Return of the Prodigal Son, but it was covered in mud. It was stained and it was torn. Would you treat it like trash? Just because it's in the trash, it kind of looks like trash. And I think the reality is we all know that we would be able to say that underneath that mud and that damage is still a masterpiece that's worth millions of dollars. It needs to be restored. I believe that that's how God sees all of us, that we are all masterpieces created in His image. And yeah, we're all imperfect, and there's mud and there's stain and there's tear, but He's wanting to restore us. I believe that we can do the same for one another. And that's actually what changes individuals. It's what changes neighborhoods. So this week, I want you to think about that. What is the mud that maybe keeps you from moving closer to the people around you, to getting to know them? Maybe it's political differences or lifestyle differences or behavioral differences. And how might you move from judging to tolerant and respectful to even offering grace, valuing that person for who they are, not just seeing the differences? I believe that is what will lead us to love where we live.
I hope you're feeling encouraged by what you heard from John. It's amazing to think that our efforts and actions can have such a tremendous impact on a single neighbor, a neighborhood, a city, even our country. So this week, practice grace, and then watch what it does to both your heart and the heart of the other person. Thank you for being with us. I'm Ron Oliveda.